I'm at the bank making money, making moves. Machines with tools and drills, making grooves. Missions impossible. That's lotsable.
Welcome back to In the Green. This is Nora Lee, and I'm happy to welcome today Simon Schwerdt, who's with us here in London. Simon, how are you today?
I'm very well, Nora. Thank you very much. Very well, Nora Lee. Yeah, that's it's been an interesting day on the market. So,
oh my goodness, talk about an interesting day. But before we dive into the interesting day, can you tell our users a little bit about your background, where you're from, and sort of how you got into the markets? Because I found it fascinating when I met you, your story. So can we kick off there?
Yeah, I mean, okay. Well, I'm currently retired, but I had a career of 29 years.
Right.
In the city. I spent most of my time in listed derivatives, working for, actually for 29 years, not many banks. I worked for James Capel, which became became part of Hong Kong Bank, Merrill Lynch and Credit Suisse. So I think
that wasn't your initial intention. I remember you said it wasn't to go into the markets.
No, well, I mean, to be honest, I didn't know what I was going to do when I was a young man, really. I think I mentioned to you that my sort of introduction to the city wasn't really very orthodox, because I had quite a sort of difficult teenage life, I suppose. My brother died when I was 17. He was 19, and at the same time, my father got put in prison for 10 years.
That's tragic.
Those were sort of pivotal moments in my life, really. And I could have gone in any sort of direction. In fact, at that time, I kind of went in the wrong direction to begin with. I kind of had a misspent youth, I suppose, is the best way of describing my early life. But out of bad things come good things, and it was eventually when I was 21, I ended up in rehab in the southwest of England, and my girlfriend ended up in another rehab in the southwest of England. It was a sort of a big moment in our lives. And I used to phone her when she was in this rehab, and this guy used to answer the phone, and he was a lovely chap. In fact, I'm now godfather to his child. But he used to say to me, "Well, what are you going to do when you get out?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I've never worked." And he said, "Well, what are you good at?" And I said, "Well, I'm good at maths." And he said, "Well, come and get a job with me." And so, sure enough, this was back in. I got clean. I haven't had a drink or a drug since 21st of April 1984.
Wow.
But I basically, at the end of 1984, I ended up putting on a suit. I didn't even own a suit. In fact, when I left rehab, I had 5 shirts. And I left those in the back of a taxi, literally.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, I ended up getting a suit, and I went in and I had an interview, and it went extremely badly.
Did it? What happened?
Well, I was nervous. I mean, I'd never, these were big important city guys, and that wasn't me as far as I was concerned. I just put a suit on for the day. Anyway, somehow at the end of the interview, I knew I'd kind of not done it very well. And, I as I walked out, I said, "Listen, I know it hasn't gone very well, but if you hire me, I'll be the best hire you ever made." And anyway, that's somehow it was slightly ballsy. I mean, the one thing that rehab did for me, I mean, it did many things apart from, getting me clean. It taught me to, be confident about talking in front of people. When you kind of talk in front of people about your life and why things have gone wrong, you tend to, it's a very kind of low base. You can't really be frightened too much after that. So I learned courage early on from that that time in my life.
Yeah,
And so,
which is indispensable, as you say, because you feel when you've been so low, the only way really is up. You have nothing to lose.
well, exactly. And actually, it's been a huge motivation in my whole career. It was a huge motivator for me. What happened with my father and my brother.
Right.
And it was a very steadying influence for me to be 29 years in the city and not drink and not, feel the need to alter my mood in any way. I think that was also a big plus for me. I mean, I'm not saying.
Well, I suppose you had the alternate drug of the markets, which has you high and low.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I never sort of really. I mean, I got a big buzz from doing my job well, but I never really bought into it like some people do, where it became my life.
Well, that's positive.
I'm a country boy, and so at the end of the day, I have the call of the countryside, and it's a great leveler. Anyway, I managed to get this job, and I found myself working in what I thought was going to be the Queen's stockbroker, but actually, it was probably the biggest bucket shop that had ever existed in finance. And
for our users who don't know what a bucket shop is, that's essentially where you're cold calling and pushing small cap stocks, tiny stocks.
Yeah, or in my case, derivatives. Things that basically people shouldn't really be doing as private individuals, and I didn't know that.
I'm interested in that about derivatives and the fact that you say you don't think private individuals should be doing it, because as you know, right now with a lot of the other fintech apps out there, they're pushing derivatives to this generation who's barely learning what a stock is. I mean, what are your views on that?
Well, my views are that most people lose money.
Right.
I'm not saying that you can't make money, but it's very, my experience, it's people who make money are very few and far between, and they often, they have to invest a lot of time in understanding what they're doing. A lot of people make money in industry, they become millionaires, or in retail or whatever it is that they do, and then they think, well, I can make money trading the markets. And I've seen so many people come unstuck in that second career, if you describe it as that, because the markets are made to eat people like that. The pricing models for you mentioned to me options, and that's what a lot of people are doing in the markets these days, and the Robinhood traders, for example. And unless you understand Black and Scholes, and you literally have a model that you can run and look at the volatility and the different aspects of the pricing of that option, it's very difficult to buy it at the right time and sell it at the right time. So I'm not saying it's
speculating.
Sorry?
You're essentially just speculating and hoping it.
You're speculating and hoping, and some of the time, if the market is in a bull market, like US tech stocks have been recently, it seems like you can get away with it. It seems like you can do really well with it. But
until you get wiped out.
Call me old-fashioned, I think. History shows that people who make a lot of money like that, it eventually catches up with them. I wish those Robin traders well, but I'm a bit skeptical.
No, I understand. And then, so, you went from this bucket shop, and then you were you were running derivatives for one of the big shops. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what you were doing?
Yeah, well, I mean, the bucket shop was interesting because, it really taught me how to sell. I mean, as I found out later on, it taught me how to sell the wrong things to the wrong people. But, it was a real eye opener. And, in those days, I mean, I think, we even had customers handcuffing themselves to the railings outside our building. And I had no idea. I joined in good faith. I just wanted a job. I had no idea what I was joining. And actually, I was incredibly lucky because that firm eventually got shut down by the regulators. And, myself and a friend we were the only two married people in the company, and I think the company made more money than Barclays Bank in one of the years that I worked there.
Kidding.
And yeah, I mean, literally, I mean, it was incredibly profitable. And actually, the Queen's stockbroker, funny enough, James Capel, which won XL, I think 10 years in a row, and was very much thought of as the Queen's stockbroker. They came looking for a couple of very good salesmen, and my friend and I were the only two married people in the firm, and so they hired us, and literally I went from bucket shop to blue chip, and really I was completely out of my depth. I had a surface knowledge of the markets, and I didn't really know much below the surface, and
how did you educate yourself? How did you get your feet on the ground?
Well, I mean, I have to admit, to begin with, you kind of blag it, and then
you just wing it.
You just do what you can, and and then for a while you don't know much, and then suddenly one day you have a meeting with somebody and you realize you know more than they know, and it's like anything, trying to learn about something that's complicated. As long as you've got the willingness to try, it might seem like a mountain, but after a while, all those complicated things suddenly start making sense, and you can have an intelligent conversation with somebody, and of course I had to balance that. I had this great sales training that I got taught in the bucket shop. So it was an interesting way to get into the city, and I didn't go to university because I dropped out of university.
Right, and you were going to be a mink farmer, I remember.
Well, that was my great plan. My great plan was to be a mink farmer, but that was around about the time that Naomi Campbell walked up a catwalk with a mink coat and blood trailing out the back of it, and it was the
that was the end of that career.
Anti-fur farming movement, and
meanwhile, they're all going to be incinerated now with the
well, absolutely. There I was again, naively thinking that that's what I wanted to do in life, and I actually went for an interview in the Hudson Bay Company in the city before I got this. Actually, before I went into rehab. So, ironically, I did end up in the city, but not in fur farming or fur trading. I obviously went in partly because of my mathematical ability, but. So I had 5 years I had 12 years at James Capel at Hong Kong Bank, and then I went as a managing director to Merrill Lynch for 5 years, or 4 or 5 years, and ended up running listed derivatives, equity derivatives at Merrill Lynch globally, before eventually joining Credit Suisse, where I ran listed derivatives for Credit Suisse in Europe. So, it's amazing what you can achieve without a degree, and, on a wing and a prayer, and without a suit.
Right. And as you say, having courage and learning how to sell, and then eventually, understanding how it all came together.
I mean, I think that one of the things that being in rehab taught me was to be myself.
Right.
I'd spent, up until that point, I spent a lot of time trying to be somebody I wasn't.
Right.
And when you kind of get knocked down and built back up again, it's a great leveler. And I think that when you talk to clients, they really get drawn towards people who are naturally themselves. They find you out very quickly if you try to be something that you're not.
Right.
And so, that was a great, help for me in my career. Given the fact that, I got grandfathered into the city, so I never actually took an exam in my entire 29 years.
I know. It's quite lucky. I had to take all those exams, and
I know, and I apologize.
It's exhausting.
I apologize to your listeners, because they're all going to be sitting there thinking, "Oh my God, how did he jam that?"
Right.
And actually, you couldn't do it now, I don't think.
Right.
and it's probably right that you couldn't do it. But actually, it was a different time, because when I started trading over-the-counter currency options at James Capel, we literally did the risk on the back of a piece of paper. I mean, there wasn't even a risk department,
Right.
and we were talking billions,
Right.
and it was all on the back of a piece of paper. So, the city was a different place. It didn't have tape recorded telephone calls in my early years. We only started tape recording things when they started going wrong.
And when did you have Bloomberg?
No, we didn't have Bloomberg. We started literally. I started with a Reuters screen that was
right.
It had 3 tabs on it, so it was like you could tab through 3 screens, all fixed screens with various pricings on them, and that was it. And I remember going off to my first lecture in how to use Windows, or how to use a Microsoft.
Right.
So it was a different world.
Yeah, I mean, such an interesting journey, but I think it's important and inspiring for people to realize there are many different ways to get into the markets. And I think what you said about saying, if you thought the interview went poorly, but you went back and said, look, if you hire me, I will be the best hire ever. And sometimes it's those moments that make the difference. And I think it's important to remember that, because you don't have to have the traditional path. And so,
yeah, I mean, look,
even these days you hear stories that, it's still not the kosher way to get into the markets, but people still do it. And now you've got kids, trading. I mean, we've got kids on Invstr that are making, incredible returns, and they're programming everything themselves. And they're obviously very advanced technologically. So they've got that leg up on you or me, so to speak, from our day.
I spent some of my last career interviewing the top graduates at Credit Suisse.
Right.
Some of them absolutely blew me away. I mean, some of these girls and guys were so intelligent.
Right.
And the big problem as an interviewer was trying to separate them, because they had straight A's at whatever educational levels they'd done, and
right.
They had firsts at degree level, and they had masters, and
right.
And so a lot of the time it would come down to the character, we would kind of really look to try and separate that when we were interviewing,
right.
trying to find out what is it about the person that that we might like, and that clients might like. What is it? Not necessarily their education, but what are their interests? Very often we'd make big calls on their interests.
No, absolutely. And as you said, clients want to work with you when they feel you're genuine, and there's a real connection there. So I think that makes a big difference. Now, in terms of you being retired now and the markets, I mean, it's been an interesting year and an interesting past week. What's your investing style? How do you put your money to work? Or are you active? Are you passive?
Well, I don't know. I'm not a great risk taker. I mean, I always said that, if you're a salesman, which I was, don't
right.
think when you leave the city that you're going to become a good trader, because
right.
it's not a sort of good education into trading. If you're a good trader, you would have been a trader in the city, not a salesperson.
Right.
However, I put a lot of money out with different people, and it didn't go very well. So, bit by bit, I've kind of taken that back in hand, and I've sort of, I suppose like everything else I did in my life, I've sort of taught myself how to trade for myself. And I actually had my best year ever last year. So
fantastic.
Maybe there's a bit of hope. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, I'm very cautious now.
Right.
And yet a lot of people look at my positions and say, well, that's not cautious. I kind of, I'm quite happy to take sort of investments in things like Bitcoin, which is not still not sort of mainstream, is it? It's
right.
It's getting more mainstream, starting to get a bit of institutional buying in it.
Right. Yes, it's had a nice run lately.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, when you're down in the middle of the countryside in the west of the UK, my biggest challenge is getting information.
Right.
I mean, luckily, I have a couple of ex city friends, one of which became hedge fund manager of the year and ex Goldman Sachs trader, and he started a digital media company that I follow, and they go around the world, doing exactly what you're doing with me now. They interview, except that I'm not one of the great business minds, but they interview some of the most brilliant traders there's ever been, and they video it, and they release these videos on a daily basis. And I have to admit that a lot of my best ideas are actually their ideas.
So what do they say now? What's post coronavirus, potentially this Pfizer vaccine, and potentially we know who the president-elect is in the U.S. What do they think? Where are they putting their chips?
I think they're a little bit like me, and that is that this COVID isn't our only problem.
Right.
I mean, we were printing money way before COVID. Okay.
Right.
I mean, we were going to print money whether COVID came along or not. We're going to do it again. This vaccine might actually, put off the day that this gets really difficult again. But I think that my friends and I feel that it is, there's a lot more to play out in this. They believe the next phase of the markets is going to be
sideways or down?
Well, no, there's going to be liquidation phase, which is going to be a whole load of companies going bust.
Which we still haven't really seen yet.
No, a lot of that has been put off because of money printing and furlough and all of the other things that have sort of kept businesses in
artificially inflated.
Yeah, but I think that's going to come home to roost eventually, even with a vaccine. So, I think
it's a question of when.
Clearly, there's a knee-jerk action today. With markets going up, sort of in some cases 5-8%, big stock market moves, and gold going down 5%. But I don't think that gold was only going up because of COVID. And I think that people have realised that, and we'll go back to seeing safe haven assets becoming popular again. And I don't want to be too negative, but
it's important to be level-headed, because especially I think for a lot of our younger users who've just gotten into the markets for the first time, I think what happens is if you only see it go up, you don't know that it can also go down or retrace. Whereas you've seen cycles, I've seen cycles. And so it's important that they're wary as well, and also heed some words of caution.
Yes, my first big year in the city was in 1987, which you'll know was one of the biggest crash years of all time.
Exactly.
And so I sat there at my screen watching everything go horribly wrong for only about a month, and it was all over. But it was still pretty spectacular. And so it teaches you to be a bit cautious. I mean, that having been said, I do have stock market investments, and I'm not sort of totally negative, but I do retain quite large cash levels, probably larger than most people.
Right.
And I always seem to miss out when the market comes down. I don't manage to get in like I promise myself I'll do next time.
Right.
It's all falling apart. But
Simon, and any favorite stocks that you're invested in?
Oh gosh. What are my favorite stocks? I mean, look, I mean, I'm in a few pharmaceutical stocks, and I wouldn't really recommend them because they've
already had their run.
They're quite high risk. But I actually invest with some very, very good fund managers. the likes of Terry Smith at Fundsmith. He's got an incredible track record, and so I tend to sort of try to follow other smart people and let them do the investment calls more often than not. I do a few things myself, but it's very small.
Right. Well, that's, it's been wonderful to chat with you today, Simon, and hear this, and this non-orthodox journey into the markets, and, how you've had a spectacular career, and, you're still enjoying the markets even in your retirement.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can't take the markets out of a man, really, can you, or a woman? I think once you spent your life, so even though I like farming, I kind of get back in the evenings, and I go on Twitter because that's where I get a lot of my information, and I find it fascinating, and my son does as well, and he's a completely different generation, so
well, I'd be curious to know how your son does versus you in the Invstr private league. It's
he's a lot better than me, and that's because he's a lot more invested in Bitcoin than I am, and
right.
I try to counsel him, of course, like a father, and say, look, that's not very sensible, is it? And he says, well, I've got I don't have the opportunities that your generation had, and I have time on my side, and actually.
That is true.
I often think back to my career, and I thought, if only I'd thought like that a few times, I would have been a lot richer than I am today, or a lot more successful. So maybe he's right.
Well, those are some good words of advice.
I still worry as a father.
Think long term, like your son.
Yeah, he's completely out investing me this year, so credit to him.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, thank you, Simon, for joining us today.
Making money, making moves, machines with tools and drills.
This is Nora Lee. I'm not a financial advisor. My comments should never be taken as financial advice. Remember, investments come with risk, so always do your research and analysis beforehand. Happy investing.
Making money, making moves, machines with tools and drills, making grooves, missions impossible.